The Starside Prophecy by Tirri. Read by the author. Chapter 18. The Hotel Palacio dell'Oceana. Pious Spain, traditional Spain, was a place the conformists reside. Shadow Spain of the Arabian quarter of Vigo Pontevedra was a place that offered something that could not be found elsewhere. No pretence, none. Gwendolen entered the place where transients, whores, gamblers, drug addicts, and a few naive and inquisitive tourists ventured, all in search of new emotions. Thieves and bandits, brandishing their stolen wares, halted pedestrians with the promise of a bargain. Transvestites exhibiting themselves as showgirls strutted back and forth in 7-inch platforms. A wheelchair-bound man without legs navigated his way into a brothel to seek an hour or two of pleasure. Gwendolen could feel the emotions of unease emanating from those surrounding her, but remained indifferent to it. Most in the Arabian quarter were on the lower levels of ascension and had no idea that their thoughts and beliefs were creating every detail of the lives they were living. All would eventually wake up from their self-imposed trance, of course, some in less time than others and some in more. A young man, a teenager, wearing a fedora trimmed with monkey fur, walked up to Gwendolen. He wore dark glasses to conceal the circles under his eyes and a long-sleeved shirt to conceal the puncture wounds in his arms. But it was his countenance that concealed something far worse, an irredeemable sense of self-loathing. The young man opened his palm just enough to reveal a small plastic packet containing a powdery substance. He offered it to Gwendolen. "This make you feel good, princess," said the young man in broken English. Gwendolen knew the heroin had been cut with strychnine and caffeine because of its pinkish grey colour, and knew it could be lethal. Gwendolen signalled for the young man to step out of the thoroughfare and reached into her purse to peel off several large notes from the wad of euros nestled in the satin lining. Keeping the money in her left hand, Gwendolen held out her right palm. The transaction was instant, and the young man tipped his hat before melting back into the squalid life he'd come from. The young man had been selling drugs since he was 12, drugs of a very poor quality. Tonight he would buy himself the very best, and he would find himself back Starside where his father would be waiting 12 hours later. His life and his father's had been almost identical. After stuffing the heroin into her purse and deflecting a further bombardment of solicitations, Gwendolen approached the entrance of the Casbaria. A doorman dressed in a polyester costume resembling Ali Baba's gestured for her to enter. She winked at him and thrust several large banknotes into his waiting hand. Gwendolen chuckled to herself. Tipping millions over the course of her career had been a sweetener in a line of work otherwise considered macabre. "Muchas gracias, amiga," the doorman replied before stuffing the money into his pocket. He didn't bother looking to see how much it was, but it wouldn't have mattered if he'd had. He was due to be pickpocketed on his way home tonight. A co-worker of Gwendolen's, a junior dispenser, had several minor jobs in the area. After entering the Casbaria, Gwendolen made an immediate sweep of her surroundings. The Count's reflection was easy to spot. So this is where the bastard starts the ball rolling, she thought with disdain. Gwendolen did not care for the smell of incense, and the gaudy decor made her cringe. She returned her attention to the Count. The pallor of his skin told her he was unwell and likely physically very weak, but the flare in his eyes told her that his anger could overcome any deficiency. The Count was sitting at the bar next to a tall, pert, peroxide blonde. Gwendolen would have to get rid of her before making her presence known. The chance presented itself quicker than expected when Oksana excused herself from the Count's company. He did not stand up. The Slavic beauty headed for the powder room, and Gwendolen quickly followed her in. Gwendolen waited for the young woman to come out of the toilet stall. Oksana walked up to the sink to wash her hands. Then she reapplied some lipstick while evaluating her encounter with the man in the yellow shirt. He was a pig and probably a liar, and she decided giving him another second of her time was out of the question. Besides, there were plenty more fish in the sea, which was only a mile or so from where she was standing. Oksana smiled as she remembered her grandmother's strategies for courting men. After blotting her lipstick, Oksana headed for the door, but a tall blonde woman was blocking her exit. Oksana jumped back, startled. "Señorita, I have no money and this bag is fake, but you can have it if you want it." Gwendoline inwardly laughed, but kept her tone serious. "I do not want your bag." Oksana looked at the beautiful and authentic Chanel clutch Gwendoline had tucked under her arm. "No, you wouldn't," she thought. "What is your name?" asked Gwendoline. "Oksana." "Oksana, I want you to leave this bar and never come back. Do you understand? The man you are talking to is my husband and the father of my children, and I cannot live without him. You must not come back here again, ever." Gwendoline opened her purse. "I can make it worth your while. I am a very wealthy woman, and I will share some of what I have with you." Oksana kept her eyes fixed on Gwendoline, hoping that the woman would not get violent. The pompous idiot at the bar had made her feel very uncomfortable anyway. This woman could have him. "I am very sorry," said Oksana in a steady and apologetic tone. "I did not know he was married. He never mentioned his family, and he isn't wearing a wedding ring." "I understand. You weren't to know," said Gwendoline, reaching into her purse and pulling out a large wad of purple banknotes. She handed the money to Oksana, who took it gingerly but also deftly. Oksana remained silent but alert, not knowing whether the woman's generous gift was subterfuge for a more sinister surprise. Gwendoline smiled at the Russian. She could tell she was sceptical, but she hid it well. Her English was pretty good and she was full of spirit. Gwendoline really liked her. "Take a train to Madrid and head for the Four Seasons Hotel. I have given you enough money to stay there for a week and live well. You might meet a nice man, one who is not married, and you might fall in love, perhaps with a doctor. There are many doctors in Madrid because it has one of the largest medical schools in all of Spain." Oksana's eyes widened and her jaw dropped. Destiny was surely speaking to her. Oksana smiled at her strange benefactor and tentatively offered Gwendoline her hand. Gwendoline shook it and sent a quick charge of positive energy into the psyche of the young Russian with the world at her feet. "Go now," said Gwendoline, holding the door open. "Go." Oksana nodded and walked towards the door. As an afterthought, she turned towards Gwendoline and said, "I'm so sorry, I really am. I did not know he was married." "It's okay. Go." Oksana walked out of the Casbaria, across the street and into her hotel without a glance towards the Count. Back in her room she sat on the bed and counted the money. With a sense of budding excitement about future possibilities, it didn't take her long to pack. After paying her bill, she carried her suitcase out into the street. A taxi waiting for a new fare was waiting for her. She told the driver she had one stop to make before the train station. The driver put the suitcase into the trunk and opened the rear passenger door. "Muchas gracias, amigo," said Oksana, settling into the back seat and buckling her seatbelt. After a few minutes, Oksana could see Don Miguel standing on the corner, hustling two young tourists good-humouredly. The girl had her eye on his many fake purses and was laughing, and so was her boyfriend. Oksana asked the driver to pull over and wait. She got out. "Hola, amigo mio," said Oksana, approaching Don Miguel with outstretched arms. Don Miguel smiled up at the tall beauty he had met earlier that day. He blushed. "You've come back to me." "Yes, I've come back to you," said Oksana, laughing, "but only to say goodbye." Oksana leaned forward to hug the little rogue who had captivated her with his charm. The girl and her boyfriend stood aside, revelling in the warmth of the two people who were obviously good friends. "Here, you must take this and go to Moscow. You'll really like it there," said Oksana, handing Don Miguel several large banknotes. Don Miguel watched the taxi pull away and smiled ruefully, knowing that he would never see the Russian again. She was so lively and so innocent. Don Miguel looked at the banknotes in his hand, but he did not need to count them to know that she had given him enough money for a round-trip ticket to her motherland. Don Miguel had once spent a very happy lifetime in the court of the Romanovs, but this had been wiped from his memory, and therefore he had never been able to understand his longing for a place he had never even been to. Don Miguel handed a bright blue purse with a gold chain to the girl and a small black wallet to her boyfriend, not charging either of them. He then closed his suitcase. The couple walked away hand in hand, both thinking how much they loved this quaint little city and the Spanish people. Gwendolen walked back into the main bar area, which was filling up with an assortment of shifty-looking people pretending at all costs to be happy. The Count remained alone at the bar, a look of barely disguised fury raging through him. To be kept waiting was intolerable. When Gwendolen sat on the stool next to him, he was caught off guard. He had rehearsed what he wanted to say to further demean the Slav. The Count looked at this new woman and made a mental assessment of her before deciding to honour her with a greeting. He wondered where the Slavic bitch had gone, but only briefly. The new woman had Anglo-Saxon features, but her eyes were a highly unusual jet black. Her skin tone revealed that she had not plastered herself with makeup to camouflage her blemishes, but then she was flawless and even smelled very pleasant. Not like the pretentious fragrance the other bitch had worn, but something that his mother might approve of. Ignoring the Count, Gwendolen ordered a large Bloody Mary. The bartender mixed the drink with his usual fanfare and set it before the stunning woman who had replaced the other stunner. Seemingly, both women were unaware of the Count's sexual preference. Gwendolen reached for the glass and brought it up to her lips before letting it slip out of her hand. The thick tomato juice spilled all over the Count, dripping down his legs and onto his leather loafers. "You fucking idiot," he screamed, jumping to his feet. The bartender cringed and quickly grabbed a pile of napkins. He then ran around the bar and crouched down to begin blotting the mess. The napkins soon disintegrated, leaving streaky white flakes over the Count's suit. The bartender cringed and wished they would both just vanish. It had been a long day, and if the Count was not satisfied, he would not leave a tip. The Count also knew the secret he didn't want revealed. The bartender remained attentive, hoping he was not overdoing things. The Count sat back down, barely tolerating the bartender's attempt to be servile. After most of the tomato juice had been soaked up, the bartender began using his fingers as pincers to pick off the fragments of paper towel on the Count's pants. He then asked the Count whether he could do anything else to repair the situation. Gwendolen watched, amused. "Yes, get me another drink, and wash your hands first. You look like you've just left a fucking crime scene." "Of course, sir." The bartender was used to restraining himself. "May I get you another drink, señorita?" Gwendolen ordered another Bloody Mary and watched the bartender leave the unhappy scene to mix it. This time he did so quietly, without a single flourish, keeping his back discreetly turned. "Accidents happen," said Gwendolen, shrugging her shoulders. "Sorry." The Count was seething with a level of indignation that almost made his eyes bulge. He wanted to jump on the bitch and sink his teeth into her face, altering her forever as a daily reminder that those belonging to the noble classes should not be mocked. The bartender walked back over and set down a fresh Bloody Mary, and Gwendolen took a long, noisy slurp. She then turned towards the Count and said, "Why don't you allow me to pay for your suit to be dry cleaned, unless of course it's made of polyester, in which case I can just buy you another one." The Count's indignation immediately turned to rage, and hanging on to the last threads of self-control, he hissed, "My dear, I will not be wearing this silk suit again. I do not want to be reminded of the peasant who ruined it." Gwendolen let out a burst of laughter, revealing that she was far from being offended. "Next time you go clothes shopping, steer clear of yellow. It's not a good colour on you. You look like a canary." The Count clutched his glass with such a fury he thought it might shatter if he didn't take possession of himself. He knew the bitch was toying with him, but why? He took another sip of cognac to bide some time, and now, with his anger under near adequate control, he decided to turn this game to his advantage. He lit another cigarette and turned to look at the woman, who had apparently decided to ignore him. She had taken pleasure out of his humiliation, and she would pay for that. It was then that he knew she would be his next victim. The Count spoke to Gwendolen's profile. "We didn't get off to a very good start, did we?" "It was an accident, but I will forgive you for overreacting." "Well, thank you," responded the Count. "Places like these are not for a woman such as yourself. Would you prefer to go somewhere a little more refined? I know the perfect place." "Really? Where is this perfect place?" "You beneath me with my hands around your fucking throat," thought the Count. "The Hotel Palacio de Oceana. The veranda is charming and the tapas excellent." That sounds rather pleasurable," said Gwendolen, smiling. "It would be my pleasure," said the Count, signalling to the bartender to prepare the bill. The bitch was his, he could taste it. The bartender accepted the extravagant tip and thanked the Count for his generosity. He nodded to Gwendolen but quickly looked away. He felt that her evening might not turn out the way she expected, but that was none of his business. Gwendolen waited for the Count to open the door for her. He obliged, but inwardly he objected to having to play such a subservient role. As Gwendolen glided through the door, the Count glared at the doorman for not getting it first. The hotel was a taxi ride away, but Gwendolen insisted they walk. The Count never took exercise, preferring to be chauffeured everywhere he went. Through gritted teeth he managed to conceal his annoyance. "As you wish, my dear. After all, it is indeed a very pleasant evening." The Count offered Gwendolen his arm, and she linked hers through it.